If you're able to hear me, if you can just hit the little speak button, just so I can see a show of hands that you're able to hear okay. Otherwise, I'm talking to myself. Somebody hits that button. Ah, yes, okay. Thank you. I just hit the right button. Okay, welcome. Well, this is an interesting experience. This is my first online lecture that I'm giving. It is also the first time that I'm going to be drinking whiskey while giving a lecture, which should be interesting. It's also the first time that I'm wearing my house slippers while I'm doing a lecture as well, I have to say. So that's an interesting one as well. So first of all, I'd like to say Slanjavar to everybody that's joining in today. Slanjavar is a Gaelic phrase, and it means good health. And I think, given the current climate, it is it's an exceptional phrase to say to each other. So Slanjavar, everybody. We have about 27 people in the group here just now, so if there is anything that you do want to say, just hit the microphone icon, you'll be able to talk. I've got a fair number of slides to get through though, so there'll be some interactive parts, especially during the tasting sections as well. So we'll crack on here. My name is Mike, I'm a dentist, qualified in Glasgow in 1999. I've got a master's in hypnosis from the University of London and a postgraduate certificate in the management of dental anxiety. But I guess most interestingly, I also have a diploma in single malt whisky from the Edinburgh Whisky Academy. This photograph is myself with Charles McLean, who is author of this book. It is a very, very useful resource if you are having a look at investigating a little bit more about particular whiskies and distilleries. A lot of detail in that book. So he's regarded as one of the true experts in the field. I'd like to just mention a little thanks to Vic Cameron. Vic Cameron was the tutor on the diploma course that myself and a number of other people took, including Paul McLaughlin, who I believe is with us. Hello, Paul. He's managed to get himself in the centre of that photograph. Vic Cameron, as you look at the picture, is the second from the far right. So thank you to Vic. He's a fantastic tutor. If anyone's ever interested in taking this diploma, it's a registrable through the Scottish Qualifications Authorities, and it's held in Edinburgh. Vic has worked with Diageo for many years and now does independent tuition. He also assisted a little bit with the construction of this PowerPoint, so my thank you to him. We do have a dentistry whiskey appreciation group. I'm sure a number of you are already on there, so please do go in and request to join that group on Facebook. It started off really as a way for me and a few colleagues to share a Friday night dram, but it's kind of grown arms and legs and now has over 450 members. And some of the quality of the posts in there are just fantastic. I've removed names from these ones just so for confidentiality, but there's some really fantastic posts in there. So it's a really nice way to interact with colleagues on something non-dental for a change. And that's really a big part of my enjoyment of whiskey, is the social element of it. You know, it's fun having a whiskey on your own and sharing experiences online, but you know, actually to interact with folk and friends and share your love of a passion is really important, especially with the stress of dentistry in normal times even. The other thing that I love actually about whiskey is the distillery tours. There are over 130 distilleries in Scotland, and most of them are absolutely beautiful in really nice parts of the country. So actually it's something you can even enjoy sharing with your family. Anytime we're traveling in Scotland, my family are dragged around various distilleries. I don't always get to do the full tour, but I'll at least go in the front door, have a look in the shop and pick up a distillery limited edition bottle and get some photographs. I like taking photographs of my purchases outside, as you can see here, with some bottles positioned outside the distilleries. So yes, you're not going to get bored if your hobby is visiting whiskey distilleries. There are many, many of them. I think it's wise at this stage just to put in a little slide if anyone does feel that they have any issues with alcohol. There is support online. I've got to do the responsible thing here and point you in the direction of that. So drinkaware.co.uk is a good resource. I guess, you know, they've got a survey on there if you want to find out if you're drinking too much. My feeling is if you're going on there to ask the question, are you drinking too much? You probably are. So just be cautious. Enjoy it, the occasional dram, but do it sensibly. Obviously, we know dentistry is a stressful job. A fellow whiskey connoisseur is Jeremy Cooper, who set up Confidential. This is a phenomenal resource, a confidential way of getting support. So again, if anybody is finding the current situation or just life in general very stressful, these guys are here to answer your call and to assist in any way they can. So it's a useful thing to be aware of. Okay, so we're going to do a quick poll. I would quite like to know out of the 30 of you that are online what your experience levels are, because it may just alter the pace of what I do here a little bit. So I'm going to open up a poll, and if you can all just vote on that for me, thanks. Just what is your experiences levels? Press the right button. There we go. That should be on now. So just give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, you should all have done that now. I don't know if anybody's actually voted on it. I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. Okay, a bit of a mix there. So we've got about a half coming in at the beginner level, with about a third of you intermediate, and the remainder 15% advanced. So apologies to the advanced folk. I will be teaching you to suck eggs here, no doubt. But good to know at least half of you are fairly kind of entry level, so I know that I'm not pitching it too low. The first thing really then is, what do we drink our whiskey out of? There are a number of different types of whiskey glasses that are available. The tulip, the Glencairn, a tumbler or a lowball, a highball, a balloon, or what is known as a neat glass, which stands for Naturally Engineered Aroma Technology, which is a fairly new thing on the market. Designed to remove some of the harshest kind of alcohol vapors, so that you can get a truer smell of the congeners and the aromas that come out of a whiskey. Various people will have varying preferences for types of glasses, and indeed that may vary depending on the whiskey that they are choosing to drink at a particular time. Highballs generally are good for water, and perhaps if you're mixing a whiskey, God forbid, but not great if you're sampling a dram. The rest of them all would be fairly standard for myself. I would say probably the most commonly used glass would be the Glencairn. I'll occasionally go for a tumbler if I'm just feeling a little classier, have a nice crystal tumbler. So you see some of them as we move on. When it comes to actually appreciating our whiskey, again, there's a number of ways of doing this. The first thing really is to have a look at the colour and the appearance of the whiskey that you're going to sample. Probably the best way of doing that actually is getting a sheet of white paper, taking your whiskey, and then just holding that against the white paper, so you can get a sense of the actual colour that you have there. If you have a look in the various books, there are descriptor words that will help you describe the colour of your whiskey. However, there is no wrong answer. You give it the description that it appears to you. That is true also of your nose and your palate, the aromas and the taste of the whiskey. One of the things Vic introduced very quickly to his teachings were that really there's no wrong descriptor words for your whiskey. You'll find that the people that have have a cuter sense of smell and taste will probably learn some of the lingo and start to adapt very similar terminologies. However, if you have a subtle taste of oranges, or if you get licorice, if you get that in the whiskey and nobody else does, then you're not wrong. That just happens to be what you're picking out of it. So first thing is the nose of the whiskey. As a general rule, when you're nosing a whiskey, you should start further away from the glass, just to avoid any of the alcohol burn. If you put your nose straight into the glass straight away and get alcohol burn, it becomes harder to sample. So you have a little smell at the top of the glass. and then you can move the whiskey around, just slightly tilting the glass. What will also help is if you warm the whiskey slightly, it just releases some more of the congeners and the aromas, and then you can place your nose further into the glass and just take a nice big deep sniff. Generally, whiskies are assessed on their body, whether they're light, medium, or full-bodied, and then again the taste, the palate. The palate tends to go through a range of flavours from the initial tastes as you move the whiskey, the fluid around in your mouth, and then of course the finish. So the finish is often described as being short, medium, or long. And again, you'll quite often get different tastes and flavours that will start to move around the mouth during the finish. There is this big debate, of course, about water. Should you add water to your whiskey? And it is, again, one of these big debates and conversations. I maybe should have put a poll in to see what you all think. Again, to be honest, the answer is there's no right or wrong answer. Be aware, however, that the strict definitions of whiskey in Scotch whiskey is that it has to be 40% ABV. So if you add water to a 40% whiskey, officially what you have in the glass is no longer whiskey. For me, again, I very rarely add water to my whiskey now. There are certain whiskies that I'm going to sample today that I will add a little bit just to open up the flavours and the aromas. It breaks down the fatty acids and releases some more of the congeners. So again, if you're sampling a new whiskey for the first time, take a small amount, nose it, taste it, write down your notes of your experience, and then add some water. Now, I would suggest if you are going to add water, then you use a pipette. There's nothing worse than taking a jug of water and accidentally tilting your hand too much and flooding the whiskey with too much water. So a few drops with a pipette and then just gently drop them into the glass, and that will give you far more control of the water that you're putting in. The most important thing when you're sampling whiskey is going to be, there we go, Clive's just put up a poll, would you add water? The most important notes to take, and I would highly encourage you to do this, would be, did you enjoy your whiskey? You know, everybody's palate is different. Everybody's going to enjoy different whiskies. And again, you're not right and you're not wrong. Is it something that you personally enjoyed? And take note of that as well. Because there are some very useful little charts. There's things that will show you. If, for example, one of the ones we're going to sample today is the Aberlour Buna, if that happens to be a particular favourite, which it is of mine, I can have a little look around the chart and see what else is in that kind of region, and there's a good chance that I'll find something else that I particularly enjoy by going near this. For me, that is one of the ways that I discovered the Glendronach 12-year-old, which is up on the top right-hand corner. I actually originally had the Glendronach in here as my Speyside example, and then I've always thought of it as being a Speyside, but it's apparently a couple of miles outside of the Speyside region, so I quickly put the Aberlour Buna in there at the last minute. Thanks for doing that, Clive, and changing the presentation at the last minute. Good. So, yeah, I mean, for me, the enjoyment of whiskey moves all around this chart. For somebody that's never had whiskey before, I think having an awareness that there is such a range in whiskey, you cannot have a single whiskey and make a decision on whether you like whiskey or not, because there is so much variation. So it's about finding the part of the chart or the type of whiskies that you particularly enjoy, and exploring some around that flavour profile, and then moving outside of that very gradually. I now can happily wander around any flavour and taste, and one of my problems with whiskey is I find it very hard to find one that I dislike. Probably for me, the ones that I still struggle with a little bit more would be the medicinally peated Eyelid or Island whiskies. I find them a little harder, and there are ways of gradually coming into them. So if I'm going to have a strong Talisker, for example, what I'll maybe do is have something a little softer to start off with. So I'll maybe have a Lagavulin, move into a Lafroig or a Bunny, and then move up to the Talisker. And that just eases the palate into it, so you're not jumping straight in. So, whisky regions in Scotland. These are 5 main regions: the Highlands, Speyside, Lowlands, Campbelltown, and Eyelid. The islands are generally accepted as a subdivision of the Highlands rather than an actual region in their own right. Speyside for a long time was considered also a subdivision, but in 2014, the SWA recognised it as a distinct region. And of course, you will find that moving around the different regions and sub-regions, there'll be characteristics that tend to be more commonly found within that region. So, your Eyelid is going to be potentially more peated. That said, the traditional flavour profiles of regions is changing. A lot of distilleries are putting out heavily peated whiskies. Some of the Eyelid distilleries now do non-peated whiskies. So you do tend to find that ability to be able to judge a whiskey by its region is becoming a little bit more difficult as the what bottlings are offered by each distillery changes. So I'm going to get into the first whiskey. If Clive is able to jump in and put in a brief poll here, is anybody joining me in this? It'd be useful to see if anyone is going to be doing this with me. Just now, I'm going to start with the Dalwhinnie. This is a Dalwhinnie 15. Dalwhinnie is the highest whiskey distillery in Scotland. It is owned by Diageo's. It is a Highland distillery, but it also, I believe, falls into Speyside if it wishes. It does prefer to call itself a Highland whiskey, however. So having a look at the colour of this whiskey, it's a nice kind of amber colour. On the nose, it's kind of toffee and fruit salad kind of smell. It's quite floral and definitely a fruity kind of pear kind of smell. On the palate, it's quite light. Again, very fruity. And the kind of toffee, honey tones on the finish. The finish is quite long. It's lingering with a kind of, for me, a kind of citric lingering sensation. Again, quite floral in the finish, heather, and a bit nut. I may have said that already. So Dalwhinnie 15 is at 43%. The price on the Dalwhinnie is about £40. I've got a smaller bottle here. This was, I think it was £16 at the distillery where I got it from. They use bourbon casks, I believe, for this, and there's a small finish with a sherry cask, just a short finish with that. So that is the Dalwhinnie. It is a beautiful distillery, actually, and you can see in the photograph here. I believe it was also the first distillery to use the copula. It's often misnamed a pagoda. It's the copula at the pointed part of the roof that's involved in some of the drying stages. That also, again, it's very familiar across many distilleries, very attractive feature. But this is a particularly attractive distillery if you ever visit. And it's right off the main road, actually, if you're travelling up into the Highlands, so very easy to get into. Okay, again, another hugely debatable question. Is it whiskey or whiskey with an E? And of course, the answer is it depends on what it is you're actually talking about. Generally, whiskey without the E is Scotch or Scottish whiskey. And most other countries in the world that produce whiskey will not use an E. So Japan, India, Wales, Canada, England, and Taiwan with their Kalila. Whiskey with an E tends to be Irish whiskey, and also whiskey with an E is more commonly used in the States for their whiskies and for talking about whiskey in general. A few Scotch whisky facts here. It is believed that the distillation process started in China. I guess, like most things, began in China. It then moved out into the Middle East before making its way to Ireland in around 1405 is the first mention of whiskey in Ireland. First mention in Scotland of whiskey, 1495, to Friar John Corr, ordered by order of the king to make aqua vitae, 8 balls of malt. So that's the first reference that we're aware of about whiskey being in Scotland. And of course, whiskey is from the Gaelic whisky, meaning the water of life. A few other Scotch whisky facts. In the picture here is myself and Colin Scott. Colin is the master blender at Chivas Regal. The word Scotch, I have to admit, I used to dislike the word Scotch. Being from Scotland, it sounded a bit derogatory, I think, because English folk also call us Scotch, which just is very irritating if you're Scottish. And I never really liked the term until I did the diploma course and actually realised how protected and useful a term that it actually is. The word Scotch is protected in the same way as the word champagne is. So only whisky that has been produced at a distillery and matured in a distillery in Scotland may use that term. It has to be made from water, malted barley, and other cereal grains. It has to be mashed and distilled at no more than 94.8%. There can be no additives to be called Scotch other than caramel colouring E150A. It has to be bottled at no less than 40%, matured for a minimum of 3 years in an oak cask of no more than 700 litres, and it must retain the colour, flavour and taste of the raw materials used in and the method of production and maturation. So they're the rules that have to be followed for something to be called Scotch officially. Other whisky facts, NAS you may see cropping up from time to time. It means non-age statement, and this means that the whisky in the bottle has to be at least 3 years old. There may be some more mature whisky in there. There might be a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old whisky in there, but the minimum age has to be at least 3 years old. You find that with any whisky. If it's named as a 12-year-old, there may be some 15 or some 18-year-old in there. But the youngest whisky is reflected on the label as well. This is Barry McCaffer in this photograph, and he is assistant manager at Lefroy on Eyelid. Okay, and again, most of you will know this already, but a whisky does not mature in the bottle. A 12-year-old whisky will always be a 12-year-old whisky, even if it spends another 10 years in the bottle. So you may as well drink it. If you want to buy bottles to invest in, then the value of it may go up as the stocks of that particular bottle go down, but I would say just drink it. The interesting whisky fact, the real Mccoy phrase has its origins in whisky, they believe. It comes from, or they believe it comes from perhaps some advertising about Mackay's whisky called the real Mccoy. There was also, during the Prohibition periods, a bootlegger called Bill Mccoy, and he would go off to the Caribbean, fill his ship full of various liquors, and then he would anchor his boat 3 miles off the coast of New York, officially in international waters, and people would go out and visit the boat to enjoy his liquors. He became well known for not watering down his liquors, and he always had the highest quality Scotch on the boat. So people would talk about having the real Mccoy when they were talking about having the real whiskies. There are a variety of different types of Scotch available. So you either have malt spirit or grain spirit, and that depends on what is actually used, as mentioned later. Single malt basically means that the whisky that's in the bottle has come from a single distillery. People confuse that sometimes with single cask. A single cask means it's come out of one barrel. A single malt may have a variety of different barrels or casks in the one bottling, but it has to have come from one distillery. A blended malt can come from a variety of distilleries. So, for example, Monkey Shoulder is a blended malt. So they're all malt whiskies. They're all Speyside malt whiskies, but they come from a variety of different distilleries. So again, even with your single malt, so the Dalmore King Alexander III is a fabulous whiskey. It is a single malt, but it is a number of different casks that go into that. I believe it's 6 different casks that have been matured in different ways that go into that single malt. A blended Scotch can be a blend of both malt and grain spirit. So when you look on the label, if it says blended Scotch, then you'll probably find, in fact, definitely find that there is both malt and grain in there. Down the right-hand side, grain spirits, again, single grain, and we'll talk about how the production of grain whisky is slightly different shortly. Um, a good example that's currently on the market of a single grain whisky would be Hague Club. Again, obviously it is packaged to be trendy, but the whisky itself is probably found in other bottles. A blended grain, a bit like your compass box headism, is again blended from a number of different distilleries who use grain. When you see the terminologies double or triple cask, again, that usually means that the whisky has started off in one barrel and then it's been moved on and matured for the rest of the duration of its time in a second barrel or even a third barrel. So the one whisky has passed through different barrels, unlike being blended like the Dalmore. The one whisky has moved through barrels. Cask strength basically means that the whisky has not been watered down in any way. It is as it is as it comes out of the cask, and it tends to be a lot stronger, so it's usually coming in at over 60%, or certainly over 50%. Non-chill filtered. Most connoisseurs don't want their whisky to be chill filtered. It's a process that filters the whisky so that when you add water, it doesn't go cloudy. Again, a lot of the Americans or international folk, if they put ice or water in their whisky and it goes cloudy, they think there's a problem with the product. But it just means it's the way it's reacting with the water. So again, most folk would rather it wasn't chill filtered. So again, the normal product. Okay, so how is it made? New make spirits are made using the raw materials of barley, water, yeast. It goes through the malting process, the pre-distillation process of milling, mashing, and fermentation, followed by distillation. And we're going to run through some of those processes. So this is where I'll just explain again about the difference between malt and grain whisky. Malt whisky is through a pot still fermentation, and it has malted barley or malting, water and yeast. Grain whisky uses a continuous still, which you can see in the bottom right picture. And again, the difference is it will have some unmalted cereal that is also used as part of that process. So we're moving around the regions now. I'm now going to move on to the islands. I have here an Arran 10-year-old. Arran, I have to say, is one of my favourite distilleries. It's an independent distillery, which basically means it is not owned by a large group. This particular whisky is about 46%, I think. And you'll find you can buy this for between 35 and 40 pounds. The Arran 14 really was one of my favourite whiskies. I love the packaging. It's a nice kind of sherry flavour, but sadly that is not being produced just now, so that's why I thought I would introduce you to the 10-year-old that you can currently buy. So yes, I would say that's a kind of golden barley appearance to the colour, kind of yellow gold maybe. On the nose, it's quite sweet, and I'm getting vanilla from there, quite fruity. And certainly quite citrusy, an apple flavour, and I'm getting tones of cinnamon there as well. It's quite a medium body, I would say, to this. And on the finish, it's kind of biscuity. I'm tasting the oak in the finish there as well. It's a very, very pleasant little whisky indeed. And of course, on Arran, they have recently opened a second distillery south of the island. Is Lag. Lag is going to be producing their peated whiskies. So that's going to be interesting to follow what is happening on Arran. So this rather complicated looking diagram just shows you the malt whisky manufacturing process, and we will go through some of this while I have some more whisky. So malting process, first of all, it's the first process in the spirit production. It's often forgotten about. However, it is very important, especially with regards to the actual yield of the spirit that you are going to get at the end. The malting process turns the barley into malted barley, or what is known as malt, and it does that by releasing the starch. It produces enzymes. The barley itself is bred for this purpose. It's usually bred on the east coast of the UK, down the east coast of Scotland, and dare I reveal this fact, a lot of the barley is grown in England and then brought up to Scotland. We don't talk about that. It's a high yield for the farmer and for the distiller. And once it's been collected, it is dried and then stored for future use. The barley corn itself, you'll see in this diagram here, is made up of several parts. Once the endosperm, which is the actual starch store, so it has the sugar chains. These are the food source for the new plant, or the embryo that grows within the seed itself, within the corn. So the idea in the malting process is to free up the starch in the endosperm to produce the sugars during mashing. So it releases enzymes required for the mashing as well. And it does this by changing the barley corn through steeping, germination, and then kilning. In the steeping process, the moisture levels are raised by adding water, and germination is initiated. And that's basically just getting it to start growing. You can see the little sprouts just starting in the barley corn there. And that's what's really called starting the chitting process. So malting process, germination, is grown in controlled conditions, alters the internal structure and the biochemistry. The cell walls break down, the protein matrix breaks down, and the starches are started to get broken down as well. Then you move on to the kilning process, and that involves stopping all the activity in the grain just at the right time. It's then dried for safe storage. Flavours are potentially added through the peating process. The peating process is obviously best known in Eyelid, and they discovered that during the drying process of the corn. Obviously on Eyelid they've got plenty of peats, and they would use peat in the fires underneath the barley corn during the kilning process. And found historically, obviously, that this had a huge impact in the final flavour, getting the smokiness. When you're assessing a peated whisky, you'll find that it will depend on the parts per million that you have, and you can see down the right-hand side here in the bottom right-hand corner the level of phenols expressed as parts per million, ranging from something that's unpeated all the way up to something that is very heavily peated. Again, probably not great if you're new to whisky, going straight into peated whisky, unless that is your thing, because it does take a bit more for the palate to get used to. Everything is stored for 3 weeks. The malt settles, it's analysed, and then once it's ready for particular customers, it then will go out to various distilleries. So you probably find that that barley is supplied to a number of different distilleries around Scotland and indeed the UK. During the malting production, there are various options. Some do this on site, and some will purchase it as malt. Production process is either floor maltings or pneumatic maltings, and again, these can be done in various sizes. Moving on now, we are going to move up to Speyside and on to one of my favourite whiskies. This is the Abelard Abuna. This was probably the whisky that got me hooked, and it was the whisky that made me realise that I am a sherry whisky guy. It is known as a sherry bomb among the people that love their whisky, and I've got a photograph here of it sat by the Christmas tree because a lot of people will talk about it being Christmas in the glass, and I'll explain why in a second. So I've got this in a nice crystal tumbler just because it's a little bit more classy. It's a nice heavy-bodied full-bodied whiskey, and it just looks really beautiful in a crystal decanter. I'm going to make sure I don't drop this on my laptop. It could go very wrong. So it's a very deep auburn colour in this whiskey. On the nose, it is spiced. I'm picking up orange notes. You can, I mean, the sherry is there in the nose. You can smell the sherry very, very clearly. and it just gives you that punch of sherry. It's just beautiful. It really is. It is heavy. This is 59.9%. Various. I've just gone to audio only here. Hopefully that will kick back in a second. Yes, various bottlings of this and casks will be different strengths. So the percentage will go up from high 50s into the 60s, depending on which cask your Abelura has come from. Recently, it went through a bit of a price hike, so there were some people not very pleased that it went from the 35-40% region all the way up to about 80 or 90 pounds. But yes, it really is kind of Christmas in a glass. It's dried fruit, raisins, creamy sherry kind of flavors, and then this nice long finish. I mean, I've not had another drink since I took that first one, and I still feel that spice, that kind of chocolatey oak kind of feeling in the mouth. So I would always, or historically, I would tend to add a little bit of water to the Abelura. Again, just a few drops to open it up a little bit. So that's me just adding in a few drops with my pipette. You can see that hopefully the video is coming back on. So just dropping in a few little drops, and what you find is that just opens it up a lot more. So even in adding the water there, and I'm slightly blocked just now, but even in doing that, I can smell more caramelly toffee. It's softened it a little bit. The sherryness is reduced maybe slightly, but more vanillas as well there. It is just beautiful. So I'll definitely be finishing that one. Fantastic. Okay. So moving on to the next part of the process, we have the milling. This is normally the first stage that is done in the actual distillery itself, and it grinds the malt up into what is known as grist. It frees the starch and gets things ready for mashing. The milling process is vital that the grist ratio is correct. So when you get this this grist that you can see in the picture here, you really want 70% grits with 20% husk and 10% flour. During the mashing process, the starches and the enzymes are extracted. The starch is converted to sugar, and you recover the sugar and the enzymes. Mashing involves adding hot water to the grist, so the water goes in, and the temperature of 63.5 degrees is obtained, and that's done inside a mixer or a mashing machine. There is a filter bed in a mash tun, and the husks sink to the bottom. The wort is then removed from the washback through perforated plates onto the next stage. Now, water is vital as raw material in whiskey production. However, it doesn't make a huge difference to the flavour. That's been widely looked at, and that is the general consensus. So often on the bottles, you'll see, whiskey distilleries boasting about the water source. And while obviously it's nice to have a nice spring water source, it shouldn't really make any huge difference to the flavour. It is vital for production, and the water supply has to be adequate and it has to be available. This is the River Spey, fairly far upstream, quite near the Speyside distillery. Okay, so we're moving on to the Lowlands next. I thought a good place to have a little taste of the Lowlands would be at the aptly named GDC, the Glasgow Distillery Company. A number of us, possibly even on this presentation, are involved in a cask share, so we actually have 3 large casks sitting with the Glasgow Distillery Company. So I thought that'd be a nice one for us to sample. I have here, even in the appropriate 1770 glass, some of the GDC's 1770. So this is a new distillery that opened in Glasgow just a few years ago. This whiskey has been on bourbon and then virgin oak casks. This particular one that I'm about to sample was actually one of the first that were released. So this was out of the first few barrels that came out a year or two ago. So there were only 5,000 bottles of this particular whiskey released. So this bottle retails for around £100. You can buy the 2019 version, which is about half that. It's about £50 and should be fairly similar. I would say that's kind of deep copper kind of colour. On the nose, it's fruity with almost a kind of pineapple fruity or apricot, and I'm definitely getting the vanilla in the nose there. It's very nice. It's I'd say medium bodied. You can see it's a non-age statement, so it's maybe a little immature, but I'm getting green apple and sweet toffee, and a little bit of spice and cinnamon coming through there as well. I'd say it's quite a medium or short finish there, and it's quite creamy on the finish, so the flavours that are left in my mouth are quite soft, kind of oaky, honey kind of flavours. This is a 46% ABV. It tastes a little bit more mellow than that, I have to say. But it's, 46 is what it comes in at. So that's very promising for those of us who have cask shares within these barrels. I believe the conditions the barrels are kept in at the GDC, they're on site. You can see in the photograph here, they're held in the same place where they do the distillation. But I believe it's quite warm in there, and that does help the whiskey to mature a little bit more quickly. So a very pleasant, young, new whiskey that's been added. And again, the first whiskey to come out of Glasgow for, I think, 1770, which is why this is called 1770. Moving on to the next stage in the production process here, we have fermentation. Now, this is a natural process where the sugars are converted into alcohol, and it is the yeast that does this through anaerobic respiration. The yeast is the third raw material that's required for making malt whiskey, so it's purchased by the distillery and added at this stage, and it metabolizes these sugars to produce ethanol. Interestingly, some of the distilleries made the mistake of washing out their washbacks. They would clean them out, and then all of a sudden their whiskey wasn't tasting or didn't have the same familiar taste that it had. The reason for this is obviously they add yeast for the fermentation process, but these washbacks will actually start to develop their own cultures, and that has a big impact on the final flavour of the whiskey. So now the distilleries have learned not to wash these out. So these can be either wooden or stainless steel in the washbacks, and it's carried out for a set amount of time. Some of them are long and some are short. And this will have a big impact on the character of the new make spirit. At the end of the process, you have what's called the wash, and this is a strong beer-like substance. It's about 8 to 10% alcohol. It also has carbon dioxide, heat, and various congeners. You could drink this if you wished, but it wouldn't taste much like whiskey at this stage. And we're now moving on to Campbelltown. Now, I'm feeling a little bit more excited about visiting Glen Scotia this afternoon because I have the pleasure this afternoon of opening a new bottle. Now, anybody who loves their whiskey knows that it is a real treat when you open a new bottle. I've been holding on to this. A patient very kindly gave this to me recently, and it's the only Campbelltown I have in the collection just now. And I was leaving it in the unopened side of the cabinet, thinking I'll leave that for a special occasion. And that special occasion is now, if I can actually get it open. Here we go. So there's something rather pleasing about just breaking the seal on a new bottle of whiskey. And a lot of you will know what I'm talking about with that, removing the foil. Now, if you have a bottle that has been unopened, or if it's sat on your shelf for a long time, and you haven't had a dram for it for a while, not a bad idea just to turn the bottle and just move the whiskey around the cork. If your cork dries out and you pull it straight out, you've got a risk of the cork, the dry cork breaking and falling into the bottle, which is a real nuisance. So I would suggest just tilting the bottle a little bit, wet the cork, and you can maybe do that every so often with the whiskies that are on your shelf. And then just a small turd of the cork, again, move it again slightly just to wet the bit that was trapped before you turned. And then out it comes with a very satisfying pop. So the glass I'm going to use for this is my neat glass. Give myself a rather generous little dram there. I better put the lid back on this so that I don't end up losing it. So Scotia is one of the few Campbelltown distilleries that survived. Campbelltown is a region in its own right, but actually has only a few distilleries. There used to be over 30 in the region, but it's now down to just a few. So this is the Scotia. So I've seen this for the first time. I would say that is a kind of light chestnutty colour, kind of caramelly colour, I would say. Again, sometimes it's not a bad idea. I had some of the other samples sitting out for a short time. You don't want to leave your whiskey in the glass too long, but if you leave it out to get up to room temperature to start to mix with the oxygen, you'll tend to find it releases the congeners a little bit more. Similarly, if you have a bottle of whiskey that you have opened for the first time, tried, and you're not sure if you like it, the oxidation process is going to start in the bottle. So, give it a month or two, go back in, taste it again, because actually it may have changed quite a lot just with the oxygen getting into the whiskey. So don't judge it on the first sample that you have if it's a newly opened bottle. So it's quite a rich smell, fruity. It's definitely citrusy. I'm getting a kind of orangey and definitely spicy. There's a spiciness on the nose there. Definitely harder drinking out of a neat glass. You've got to be careful you don't end up embarrassing yourself and wearing it. Now that is a nice whiskey. That is very, very nice. It's very rich in the fruitiness and the orange. I'm still getting the orange. And a nice spiciness to it as well. So I'd say this is quite a full whiskey, full-bodied. On the palate, I'm getting the vanilla, the fruit. It's a bit ginger as well, maybe. And it's definitely quite a dry whiskey. That's why I just had to have a quick sip of water there. It was catching in the back of the throat. And on the finish, it's kind of medium long finish, I would say. And again, the main thing I'm getting from that finish is the spiciness is what's staying in the mouth, and that sense of dryness is still there. So I'm going to add just a touch of water to this one because it is a new whiskey to me. I think my video's down just now, but I'm just dropping in 4 or 5 little drops of water just to open it up a little bit. And again, it's just a little more caramel that I'm getting there from that. With the water added, again, it's just broken down the fatty acids a little bit, just opened it up. So again, this is coming in at 46%. Purchase-wise, you're looking at mid-50s, £55 to buy this. It's produced by Lowlands Distilleries. And again, it's matured in American bourbon casks. So that's the Scotia 15-year-old, and I have to say that is a very, very pleasant whiskey. That's beautiful. That is beautiful. I know, Paul, you've spent some time at Campbelltown, and we can have a chat later on about the Scotia. That's nice. Okay, so moving along in the production side of things, we have there we go. We have the distillation process. So I was just realizing I've been missing some of the messages that have been coming in, so I'm just having a quick look at them. So that's good. Lots of thumbs up. And Paul just saying, approach a cask strength whiskey a little differently than bottle strength. A lot more flavour, less burn than you would imagine. Absolutely. Drinking the wash may loosen up the upper end. I'll take your word. I'll take your word on that. That sounds like a man that's tried it. Okay, so distillation is the process that increases the strength of the alcohol. So you're going from that 8 to 10%. And what happens is it recovers the alcohol and the flavor, but removes the water. So this happens in this case for malt whiskey in the pot still. If you've heard of the terms double distillation, it goes through the process twice. In Ireland, for Irish whiskey, it tends to be triple distilled for most Irish whiskies. In Scotland, I think there may be one or two exceptions. I know Auchentoshan is triple distilled, so they go through the process 3 times. And again, remember, this is the difference in grain whiskey. So grain whiskey goes through a continuous distillation process for grain spirit. So what happens in the distillation? It's copper that is used for the still production. So they're the same essentially, but they are very different. Now, I think my understanding of this is a lot of the distilleries hadn't appreciated the impact of the still design on the final flavors of the product that they were making. But generally speaking, the still was made dependent on the size of the facilities that you had, and they were just built. But as you can see, you have quite different lengths, and you have quite different angulations on the arms. And these all have a big impact on the flavours in the final whiskey. And again, some distilleries learned that the hard way when they removed their stills to put new ones in, and then discovered that everybody complained that their whiskey didn't taste as good as it once did because they made the changes. So the actual design of the still is very, very important. So the first distillation, the wash distillation, increases the strength to about 25%, and then your spirit distillation increases it all the way up to 65 or 70% cask strength. Your flavour developments for a new make spirit, the raw materials have probably got the least impact on the flavour of your new make spirit, followed by mashing, followed by fermentation. Distillation is really where most of the flavours are going to come from. With regards to what the differences are between different whiskies. This is me at the Glasgow Whisky Festival when I had somebody with me doing a bit of filming, helping out. So I was doing some samplings, and he caught my reaction as I realised they had some of the lag new make spirits for sampling. So this was my surprise as I picked up the bottle and gasped, "They've got lag new make spirit to sample." And the second one was, "Ooh, baby, they've got lag new make spirit to sample." So yes, your raw materials, remember, are your water, your barley, and your yeast. So water and barley have got very little impact on your final flavors. Your yeast has more potential in the final flavor. Again, mashing is fairly minimal with regards to flavor development. And the final picture here with the lag bottle is just my smug face. I'm going to get to drink some lag new make. I was very pleased about that. So fermentation, I mentioned contamination earlier on, fermentation time, the type of yeast, temperature control are all going to have an impact on your final flavours. Again, your distillation, this is where the big impact has for your new make, whether it's double or triple distilled, the copper contact that it has, the type of condenser, whether it's worm or shell and tube. And then your reflux, so the size and the shape of the stills. I mentioned earlier the slope of the lie pipe or the line arm, and then the actual operation of the stills, how it all happens. Which brings us on to Eyelid. There are a vast number of distilleries on Eyelid. I'm enjoying exploring Eyelid more now. I've taken my time getting to Eyelid. I have been, like everybody, a big fan of Lagavulin 16. It tends to be one of the more commonly enjoyed Eyelid whiskies, but I am a big fan. So Lagavulin is owned by Diageo as well, and this is a really nice, classy whiskey. I like some of the other ones. Some of them are a little harder hitting. The Booney 12 is also a favourite of mine. Very, very nice Eyelid whiskey. But today I'm going to be sampling the Kalila, which is how it's pronounced, Kalila. I like the Kalila. It's a little bit less known than some of the other Eyelid distilleries. It is also owned by Diageo, so it's kind of thought of as the sister of your Lagavulin. And you can see it is very, very pale there. So I would say that's a kind of pale straw kind of colour. On the nose, it's fresh. It's kind of almost salty, kind of sea, herbal, grassy kind of smells. And obviously there's a bit of smoke. I can smell the smoke. On the palate, one of the reasons why I love Kalila. It's just elegant. It's not a hard hitter with the smoke. It's kind of like how your jumper would smell after a campfire. It's just kind of woody, smoky, elegant, sweet. It's quite sweet toffee flavors there as well. Very light. I'd say kind of medium long on the finish with a sweet, kind of spicy, and that warmth of the smoke just kind of continuing. It's 43%. Comes in at about £45 to buy. It's a good entry level if you're not used to peated or smoky whiskies. It's a great one to get started on, I would say. Moving on there, I'm conscious of the time here. So maturation is the final part now. This is where your new make spirit becomes whiskey. It has to be in the cask for at least 3 years. It has to be in an oak cask. Maturation process occurring inside the cask that turns it into whiskey over time. There's colour and flavour that's added, and there are also evaporations and losses. That happens through various reactions: elimination, addition, substitution, evaporation, absorption. You're probably all aware of this concept of the angel share. As the whiskey evaporates, the quantity of the whiskey reduces, and what is lost is known as the angel share. Again, you get a number of different flavours that are coming in from the wood, the vanillins, direct from the wood. So the different species of wood are important, whether it's American or European oak. And of course the previous contents, if it's been a sherry cask, if it's been a bourbon cask. We're moving into more interesting times with experimentation with other casks. So you'll find that you have IPA casks and wine casks. As far as Scotch is concerned, the SWA basically said it has to be something that would traditionally be used for whiskey maturation. So it's a little bit contentious whether or not we should be using tequila casks or buckfast casks or whatever else might come next. So maturation through substitution, esterification and oxidation. There are a variety of different sizes of cask. You have your barrel, your hogshead and your butt. They can be European, American oak, as I said. Is time always important? As if it's a 20-year-old whiskey, is it going to be better than a 12-year-old whiskey? People tend to think that's the case. It's not necessarily always true. There's a number of factors involved. Again, the colour of the whiskey is going to change depending on the wood or what's been in there before. So there is this misconception that the darker the whiskey is, the higher the quality of it. That's a misconception, as you can see from this beautiful Kalila, which is really, really pale, but it is absolutely beautiful. For that reason, some products will add a little bit of the caramel colouring. Glendronach, for example, adds caramel, I think. Or is it, it might even be the Glen Scotia, I'm getting confused now, but there is, as the Glendronach, I think they add a little bit of colour into it. The final part here is just on the type of warehouse, and there's various ways you can stack these things on pallets and in racks, or just in the traditional sense on the far right there. Please do donate. This is been a free session, obviously. Clive has set up a voluntary donation to the Prince and Princess of Wales Hospice. They will be losing money, I'm sure, with people tightening their belts. So please do donate if you can. And thank you for listening. This was my whiskey collection about 3 months ago. It has grown a little bit since then. It is a great part of the joy of enjoying whiskey, is just building a collection, especially if we have to go into lockdown for several months. I'm delighted to say that I've got enough to keep me going for quite a while if it comes down to it. I don't need to buy any more or risk going out anywhere. I can just slowly make my way through this collection. And again, just please go into the Facebook group, join the group if you haven't already. We do plan to have some live events, but we're going to have one in May that sadly we have had to postpone. But do look out for information about that. I also am involved with something called Interdental TV, which is a YouTube channel, so please do find that on YouTube and subscribe. If anybody wants to come in, just activate your microphone or leave any messages. That would be great. But otherwise, I'm just going to sit back and I've got 6 rather nice whiskies that I need to finish because they ain't going back in the bottom. So, thank you very much, all of you, for joining me. And I hope you've enjoyed the talk today. And I hope you've enjoyed whatever whiskies you were sharing with me. It's Langibar. Cheers. I finished in time as well. So if you want to talk, just click on the little microphone there and you'll find you're able to chip in, and it'll be great to hear what you've been drinking and how you're getting on. Good, some messages coming in. Thank you all. What am I going to finish with here? I think I'm going to have to keep drinking this Glen Scotia. That was very nice. Thanks, Paul. It's quite intimidating when you know that you have people that are tuning in that know far more about whiskey than you do. So it's appreciated. Thanks for doing that. The Glen Scotia 15 Dawn. Yes, it is beautiful. Thank you. And I hope you all stay safe, look after yourselves, and look after the folk around you, and try not to get too stressed in these times. It is a difficult time, so just take it easy. I've actually got a free download of Help Yourself Sleep MP3s. If anybody's needing help getting to sleep, then give me a shout, and I can send you a copy of that. No problem at all. Carolyn had Lafroig and up today. That's nice. I do that. I'm trying to get myself gradually into Lafroig. I find it a little kind of medicinal, a little harsh. Same with Talisker. Let's see if I build myself up Kalila and a Lagavulin, I can get to it, but I can't go straight into it. Hi Neil. So favourite Eyelid whiskies? Yes, I mentioned earlier I do. It's a little boring, but I do like the Lagavulin 16. It is just classy, elegant, and it's easy to get if you're at the bar. So it's a nice Eyelid whiskey to enjoy if you're out and about. And these days I'm quite enjoying my Booney 12. It is, it's really nice. It's kind of dried fruits and kind of sweet. It's just a bit kind of fuller than the Kalila. The Kalila's kind of lighter, which is, oh no, it's not the one. The Kalila is the one that I sampled today, and it's just a little bit lighter, but also beautiful. So, as I say, it's taking my one. Favorite Japanese whiskies? I do like a Japanese whiskey. As a favorite, I'm not sure. I've not really, I guess, explored them a huge amount. I've got uh, I've got one of each. I guess as just um, a general drinker, that they're nice. I think, I mean, the Japanese whiskies are obviously very classy, very well done, all done in this very similar fashion to Scotch. Um, if you if you blind poured them and asked me to sample and tell which was which. I may struggle a little bit, but I have to say I still think Scotch has just got the edge on Japanese. Definitely. Yeah, like 16, the smoky sherry dram. That's probably why I love it so much, the sherryness of it. Favorite blend? I'd have to say a Chivas Regal Royal Salute. It's uh, it's very nice. I did realise recently though that I'd left it in my flagon too long because you can't see how much is left in the bottle, and I'd left too little for too long. In one of my Royal Salutes, I poured myself a dram, realising it was the last one, and it had been in there for a few months, and it wasn't great. So just be careful with with that one. Johnny Walker Swing, yes, I need to have a look for that one. That's good advice, Paul. Yamazaki 16, Stephen, yep, definitely. Vicky, yeah, absolutely. So what else? There's a few of you left on there. Are any of you sitting with a dram? What have you got in your glass just now? If you want to talk, you should be able to click on your video or microphone. Feel free to come in for a chat if you like. We've got small enough numbers, we can probably do that. Fives away. Abler 12, yes. Nice. Huge share of ice. Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of putting ice in whiskey. I find that it obviously cools the whiskey down, which slows down the aromas and the congeners. And also, as you drink your whiskey and as the ice melts, you're going to have a far higher dilution. If you're going to drink it quickly, fair enough. I would maybe think about it. Certainly, one that I've had with ice is the Dalwhinnie Winter, and that's served from the fridge, or sorry, from the freezer. So you put your Dalwhinnie Winter in the freezer, leave it there overnight. It doesn't freeze, but it slows it down. So as you pour it, it's almost honey-like as it comes out. It's chilled and it's beautiful. So a lump of ice in there as well is pretty pleasant. Glenfiddich 18, very nice. We Highland Park 12, beautiful. Whiskey Stones is a possibility. Yeah. Again, though, to be honest, I want my whiskey to be room temperature. I want even one of the beauties of, although it's a hard glass to drink out of, but actually warming the whiskey with your hand here, you're going to get the flavors and the aromas that are coming out more. If you're cooling it down with whiskey stones, you just slow down the movement of those molecules, and it just reduces the flavor profile. If you're struggling with a whiskey, certainly. So for me, getting a Talisker or Sky or something, and cooling it down, dropping some ice in it, I probably could handle it a bit better. Yeah. Scapa 16 was one of the most delicious standard releases from the distillery. Unfortunately, discontinued. Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's a few stragglers still on here. I'll finish this one off, and I guess we'll call an end to it. But it has been a real pleasure sharing a whiskey with you all. It's been a lot of fun. Paul saying, not sure how you pronounce that. Is that Skirin? Yeah. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I think we'll probably call it there. Go off and enjoy your whiskey and hug your families, and hope you're all keeping well and safe. And I guess that's it for today. So Slangy Bar, and cheers to you all. Thank you very much for joining in. Please do send me a wee message. Let me know how you felt that went. As I say, that's my first web-based lecture. It's a bit weird. Obviously you're getting messages coming up from people talking or leaving messages, but it is a bit odd when you don't know exactly how the feedback is going as we go. But yeah, you're definitely there. You kind of start to wonder as you're doing this if folk are actually there and you're just sitting getting drunk on your own. I guess there's nothing new there. Backline Scotia is fantastic. All right, guys, take care. Cheers for now. Bye bye.